If that pup takes one more step toward her, I will know exactly who in this pack has been lying to me. The Alpha King's voice stopped the entire valley. Alexander Voss stood at the edge of the frozen road, surrounded by Silvercrest warriors, council members, and royal guards who had spent the last hour searching for one missing wolf pup. But nobody was watching the storm anymore. Nobody was watching the broken carriage trail. Every eye was on the Omega woman kneeling in the snow with the Alpha King's royal pup sleeping safely against her chest. Alara Whitmore looked up slowly. Her coat was torn, her gloves were covered in mud, and her brown hair had come loose from the simple braid she wore when she worked. She looked nothing like someone who belonged in front of a king, which was exactly why the whispers started. An Omega from the border villages? One council member murmured. She touched the royal bloodline? Another voice followed. How do we know she didn't lure the pup away? Alara heard every word. She always did. But she kept one hand gently resting on Nova's fur because the little wolf had finally stopped trembling. I didn't lure him anywhere, she said quietly. He found me. A few guards exchanged doubtful looks. Alexander's expression did not change. That was what frightened most people about him. The Alpha King did not need to raise his voice to make a room silent. He carried the kind of authority that made people remember exactly who stood before them. Explain, he ordered. Alara glanced down at Nova. Your pup was scared. The storm pushed him away from the convoy. He was cold, exhausted, and too stubborn to admit he needed help. For the first time, something almost like surprise crossed Alexander's face. You speak about my royal wolf as if he is a person. Alara looked back at him. Isn't he? The question landed harder than anyone expected. The council went quiet. Even Alexander's guards looked uncomfortable. Nobody spoke to the Alpha King that way. Not because he demanded fear. Because everyone had forgotten he was still a man beneath the crown. Nova shifted slightly in Alara's arms, then opened his eyes. The pup looked past her shoulder and directly at Alexander. A strange silence filled the valley. Alexander felt it immediately. The bond between him and his wolf line had always been clear. Royal wolves did not trust easily. They did not choose randomly. They did not accept strangers. But Nova was doing something impossible. The pup reached toward Alara instead of him. A low murmur moved through the pack. Alexander stepped closer. Give him to me. Alara hesitated. Not because she wanted to challenge him. Because she knew the pup was still afraid. Your Majesty, she said softly, he trusts you. But right now, he trusts that I won't let anything happen to him. Those words should have offended him. Instead, they stayed with him. Alexander looked at the Omega standing in front of him, someone with no title, no army, no powerful family behind her. Yet she had done what trained warriors failed to do. She protected the one creature his entire pack would sacrifice everything to save. Then Nova pressed his head against Alara's hand. The air changed. Every wolf in Silvercrest felt it. A bond recognized by instinct. A connection nobody could explain. And for the first time in years, Alpha King Alexander Voss wondered if the greatest threat to his carefully controlled world was not an enemy outside his borders. Maybe it was the quiet Omega standing in front of him, holding the future of his pack in her arms. The first thing Alara noticed about Silvercrest Castle was not the size of it. It was the silence. The massive stone walls, the tall silver banners, and the hundreds of pack members watching from the courtyard all felt less intimidating than the quiet judgment following her every step. She walked beside two royal guards while carrying a small wooden basket filled with herbs and supplies. Behind her, Nova rested inside a warm blanket, refusing to leave the person he had chosen. You realize he has a royal nursery prepared for him, one guard finally said. A room with heated floors, custom blankets, and the finest care in the entire territory. Alara looked down at the little wolf pup sleeping peacefully. That sounds lovely. The guard waited for more. But Alara adjusted the blanket around Nova. But he still looked for someone to hold him when he was afraid. The guard did not answer. Maybe because he understood. Maybe because nobody at Silvercrest was used to hearing someone speak about the royal wolf as if he was not a symbol, but a living creature with feelings. When they reached the main hall, the whispers became louder. Omegas from the lower territories rarely entered this part of the castle. They were healers, workers, caretakers. Important, perhaps, but never someone who stood beside the Alpha King. Alexander Voss waited near the council chamber doors. He had removed his travel cloak, but the weight of leadership still followed him. Bring Nova to the royal nursery, he said. Alara stopped. He does not want to go. Several council members looked shocked. And Omega had just disagreed with the Alpha King. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. You are certain? Yes. She looked at Nova. He keeps pretending to sleep every time someone mentions leaving. A tiny ear moved under the blanket. The room became very quiet. One of the guards looked away to hide a smile. Alexander noticed. He is pretending? Alara nodded. He is not very convincing. For the first time, something almost human softened in Alexander's expression. Not a smile. Not yet. But something close. Then Council Elder Cassian Vale stepped forward. His silver hair was perfectly arranged, and his voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades being obeyed. Your Majesty, with respect, this cannot continue. Alexander turned toward him. Explain. A royal wolf cannot become attached to an unknown Omega without investigation. Cassian looked at Alara. We do not know her background. We do not know her intentions. We do not know why the pup chose her. Alara felt the room change. This was not curiosity. This was suspicion. Alexander watched her carefully. Tell me about yourself. Alara stood straighter. My name is Alara Whitmore. I work as a healer in the northern villages. I treat injured animals, farm creatures, and pack members who cannot afford royal care. Your family? Cassian asked. The question sounded simple, but something about it felt deliberate. Alara paused. My family is gone. Alexander noticed the small hesitation. The same way he noticed everything. The way she protected Nova without thinking. The way she never once asked for a reward. The way his own wolf had become unusually calm whenever she was near. That last thought bothered him most. Because he could feel it too. Not a command. Not an obligation. Something quieter. Something older than logic. Alexander stepped closer. Until we know the truth, Alara Whitmore will remain under royal protection. The council reacted immediately. Your Majesty, Cassian began. That was not a request, Alexander replied. The hall fell silent. Alara looked at him, surprised. She expected suspicion. She expected questions. She did not expect protection. But as Alexander walked away, he glanced back once at Nova resting against her. And for the first time in a very long time, the Alpha King wondered if the strange feeling inside his chest was not a warning. Maybe it was the beginning of an answer. For the first time in years, Alpha King Alexander Voss found himself waiting for someone else to arrive. He told himself it was because Nova needed supervision. He told himself it was because the royal pup had disrupted the entire castle routine. He told himself many things. None of them explained why he was standing outside the royal gardens before sunrise, watching the path where Alara Whitmore usually walked with a basket of herbs in her hands. Your Majesty, his beta, Rowan Mercer, said from behind him. If you keep staring at that path, the flowers might begin to feel pressured. Alexander did not turn around. I am observing security. Rowan looked toward the empty garden. Of course, the greatest threat to Silvercrest Castle appears to be a healer carrying lavender and a basket of leaves. Alexander gave him a cold look. Rowan immediately looked away. I will say nothing more. But Alexander knew the truth. Everyone in the castle had noticed the change. Nova had become calmer. The royal nursery was no longer filled with anxious pacing and worried caretakers. The pup slept peacefully every night because Alara had discovered something no royal trainer had understood. Nova did not need stricter discipline. He needed trust. When Alara finally entered the garden, she stopped when she saw the Alpha King. You are awake early. Alexander glanced at the small basket in her hand. You are also awake early. I am a healer. She shrugged. Animals rarely schedule their problems during convenient hours. A quiet silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Alexander almost smiled. Almost. Alara noticed. She did not mention it. She had already learned that pointing out an Alpha King almost smiling was probably a dangerous hobby. Nova slept through the night, Alexander said. That is good. Because of you. Alara looked uncomfortable with the compliment. Because he finally feels safe. The answer stayed with him. Safe. It was a simple word. Yet Alexander had spent most of his life believing safety came from walls, warriors, and control. Not trust. Not connection. Not someone sitting beside a frightened creature until it stopped shaking. They walked toward the nursery together. The moment Nova saw Alara, the pup immediately stood and moved toward her. Then he stopped halfway and looked at Alexander. The Alpha King froze. It was a small moment. Most people would have missed it. But Alexander understood. Nova was not choosing between them. The pup was asking him to come closer too. For years, Alexander had feared his wolf's side. He had learned to keep every emotion controlled, every instinct measured, every reaction hidden. A king could not afford uncertainty. But around Alara, his wolf was different. Not restless. Not demanding. Quiet. You feel it too, don't you? Alara asked softly. Alexander looked at her. Feel what? She hesitated. The bond. The word changed the air between them. Not because it was romantic. Not because it was a promise. Because in pack tradition, a true mate bond was rare. It was something respected, protected, and never forced. Alexander looked away. You should be careful with words like that. Alara nodded. I know. A bond does not decide a person's worth. Her expression softened slightly. I agree. That answer surprised him. Most people would have treated a possible bond with the Alpha King as the greatest opportunity of their lives. Alara treated it like a responsibility. That was the moment Alexander realized she was different. She did not want his crown. She did not want his power. She simply wanted Nova safe. Later that afternoon, the council gathered again. Cashin Vale presented reports questioning Alara's origins and her sudden connection to the royal wolf. Alexander listened without interrupting. But when Cashin suggested removing her from the castle, Alexander's voice turned cold. No, the entire chamber went silent. She stays. Outside the doors, Alara heard those words. She did not know why they mattered so much. But for the first time since arriving at Silvercrest, she felt that maybe she was not standing alone. And deep inside the castle walls, someone else was already making plans to prove Alexander wrong. The first sign that something was wrong was that Nova stopped pretending to be a normal wolf pup. For 3 days, the royal nursery had been peaceful. Too peaceful. The little wolf who once refused every caretaker, ignored every royal trainer, and considered every expensive toy beneath him had suddenly become quiet. Alara Whitmore noticed immediately. You are planning something, she whispered. Nova looked away. The pup had the same guilty expression every time he was caught doing something he was not supposed to do. You know, Alara said, crossing her arms. For a royal creature, you are terrible at hiding your intentions. Nova slowly moved behind a chair. Alara sighed. That was not a better hiding place. A small sound came from the doorway. Alexander Voss stood there, watching the scene with an expression that was almost impossible to read. Almost. He does that with everyone except you. Alara turned. Because everyone else tries to convince him he is a royal symbol. Alexander stepped inside. And you do not. No, she looked back at Nova. I think he is a scared little wolf who happens to have a very important family name. The answer caught Alexander off guard. In Silvercrest, everything had a title. Every person had a place. Every action had meaning. But Alara looked at Nova without seeing a crown, a bloodline, or a future political alliance. She simply saw him. That was becoming dangerously familiar to Alexander. Later that evening, Alexander asked Alara to join him in the old training grounds. It was not a royal command. That alone surprised her. You are asking instead of ordering, she said. Alexander looked slightly uncomfortable. Is that unusual? For an Alpha King? She smiled faintly. A little. He looked away, and for a moment he was not the ruler of Silvercrest. He was just a man trying to understand something he had never been taught. My father believed a leader could not show uncertainty, Alexander said quietly. A pack follows strength. Alara listened. Strength does not mean pretending nothing hurts. His eyes lifted toward hers. You say things that would get most people nervous. Most people probably know better. And you? Alara looked at Nova, who was happily chasing a falling leaf nearby. I have spent my life helping creatures that cannot explain what they need. You learn quickly that fear often looks like anger. Those words stayed with him, because Alexander knew exactly what that felt like. His wolf had spent years being controlled, pushed down, and treated like something dangerous. Maybe that was why Nova trusted Alara. She did not try to dominate what she did not understand. She listened. The moment between them was interrupted by the sound of the castle bells. A council emergency. When they entered the main hall, Cashin Vale stood beside several elders holding a sealed document. Your Majesty, Cashin said, we discovered something concerning about Alara Whitmore's family records. Alara felt the room shift. Alexander noticed immediately. Speak carefully. Cashin opened the document. Her family line was removed from official pack records 20 years ago. Whispers spread through the hall. Alera's expression changed slightly. She knew there were missing pieces in her past, but she never knew they were hidden. Why? Alexander asked. Cassian folded the paper. That is what we intend to discover. His eyes moved toward Alera. Because someone erased her history. Alexander stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Until we know the truth, no one will accuse her of anything. But Alera looked at the document with a growing realization. Someone had not forgotten her family. Someone had wanted them forgotten. That night, while the castle slept, Nova woke suddenly and ran toward the old archive hallway. Alera followed him, confused. The pup stopped in front of a locked wooden door. He looked back at her, then at the door, as if he had been waiting for her to find it. And somewhere beyond that door was the truth Silvercrest had buried for years. The old archive door had not been opened in 17 years. At least, that was what the royal records claimed. Alera Whitmore stared at the lock while Nova sat beside her, completely confident that he had just solved a mystery everyone else had ignored for nearly 2 decades. You realize, Alera whispered, most wolves do not lead people into forbidden rooms after midnight. Nova looked at her. You are not helping your argument. The little pup tilted his head and tapped one paw against the wooden floor. Alera sighed. Fine. I understand. You are different. She placed her hand near the old lock. Before she could touch it, footsteps echoed behind her. You should not be here. Alexander Voss stood at the end of the hallway, his expression serious but his voice quieter than usual. Alera turned around. Neither should your royal wolf. Alexander looked down at Nova, who immediately looked away. For a moment, the Alpha King simply stared at the pup. Then he said, he has always had poor timing. Alera almost smiled. Almost. Together, they entered the archive chamber after Alexander used his royal seal to open the door. Dust covered the shelves, but the room felt untouched rather than abandoned. It was as if someone had carefully hidden everything inside and waited for the right person to find it. Alera moved slowly through the records. Her healer instincts made her notice small details others ignored. A missing label, a misplaced book, a stack of documents arranged too neatly to be forgotten. Someone cleaned this place before sealing it, she said. Alexander looked at her. You can tell that from a shelf? You can tell when someone is hiding something by what they leave behind. He watched her carefully. It was the same thing that had drawn him to her from the beginning. Alera did not search for power. She searched for truth. After several minutes, Nova stopped beside an old wooden box. Alexander opened it carefully. Inside was a collection of letters and a faded symbol carved into a silver pendant. Alera froze when she saw it. That mark? Alexander looked at her. You recognize it? She touched the pendant gently. My grandmother had one like this. Silence filled the room. The symbol belonged to an ancient group of Omega healers who once served the royal wolves of Silvercrest. According to the official records, they disappeared after a failed political conflict. But the letters told a different story. They were not removed because they failed. They were removed because they knew something dangerous. They knew how to recognize a true bond between an alpha and a wolf lineage. Alexander read one of the letters again. His expression changed. They were protecting the royal wolves. Alera nodded slowly. And someone wanted that knowledge gone. Before they could continue, the archive doors opened. Cassian Vale stood there with several council members behind him. His calm expression made the room colder. Your Majesty, I believe this investigation has gone far enough. Alexander stepped forward. You knew this archive existed. It was not a question. Cassian remained silent for a moment. Then he answered. I knew enough to understand that some histories should remain buried. Alera felt her chest tighten. Not from fear. From disappointment. Someone had erased her family's name. Someone had hidden the truth of the pack. And now she knew why. Cassian looked at Alexander. The pack cannot be ruled by emotions and ancient legends. We need stability. Alexander's voice became firm. You mean control? The two alphas stared at each other across the old archive. For years, Cassian had been the voice of tradition, the man who claimed to protect Silvercrest. But now Alexander saw something he had missed. Tradition was not always wisdom. Sometimes it was simply an old excuse for keeping people powerless. Later that night, Alera stood alone in the garden, holding the silver pendant. Alexander found her there. You should rest. She looked at him. Everyone keeps telling me what I should do. A small pause followed. But nobody has asked what I want. Alexander had no answer. Because for the first time, he realized that protecting Alara was not enough. He needed to understand her. Not as an Omega. Not as someone connected to Nova. But as Alara Whitmore. The woman who had walked into his world with nothing but courage and somehow made his entire pack question everything they believed. The next morning, Silvercrest Castle felt different. Not louder. Not more chaotic. Just different. The kind of change people noticed before they understood why. The servants whispered less about the unknown Omega in the royal wing and more about the old archive that had been opened after 17 years. The guards watched Alara Whitmore with curiosity instead of suspicion. But the council remained silent, and that silence worried Alexander Voss more than any argument could have. Silence is usually when people are planning something, Rowan Mercer said while standing beside the Alpha King in the council chamber. Alexander looked over the reports in his hands. You think Cashin is preparing another move? Rowan crossed his arms. I think Cashin has spent 20 years believing he knows what Silvercrest needs. People like that do not change their minds because someone finds an old box of letters. Alexander looked toward the window. Outside, Alara was sitting near the garden fountain with Nova beside her. The royal pup was supposed to be learning basic commands from the royal trainers. Instead, he was lying beside Alara while she sorted herbs. She has changed this pack in less than a week, Rowan said quietly. Alexander did not answer, because he knew it was true. Before Alara arrived, everyone in Silvercrest knew their place. Alphas commanded. Omegas followed. Tradition decided what was possible. Then one Omega walked into the castle, ignored fear, challenged assumptions, and treated the royal wolf like a frightened child instead of a symbol. That afternoon, Alexander joined Alara in the garden. She looked up. You are getting better at appearing without making everyone announce you. He glanced at her. Is that a complaint? No. It is progress. A small smile appeared before he could stop it. Alara noticed, but kindly said nothing. They spent the next hour studying the documents from the archive. The deeper they looked, the clearer the pattern became. Alara's family had not disappeared because they failed the pack. They had disappeared because they protected a secret about royal wolf bonds. A secret that challenged the council's control over choosing alliances and leadership decisions. They wanted to decide everything, Alara said. Who leads? Who belongs? Who is valuable? Alexander looked at the old letters. And your family refused. She nodded. They believed a pack was not built on bloodlines alone. The word stayed with him. Because that was the question he had been avoiding. What kind of leader did he want to be? The ruler who protected old systems because they were familiar? Or the alpha who protected the people who trusted him? Their conversation was interrupted when Nova suddenly stood. The pup looked toward the castle entrance and let out a small warning sound. Alara followed his gaze. A royal messenger had arrived carrying an official council order. Alexander opened the document. His expression changed immediately. What is it? Alara asked. He handed her the paper. The council had called for a formal pack gathering. Not a meeting. Not a discussion. A public evaluation of the Alpha King's leadership. The message was carefully written, but the meaning was obvious. They wanted Alexander to answer for the growing connection between him, Alara, and Nova. They wanted the pack to question whether his decisions were based on duty or personal attachment. That evening, the castle prepared for the gathering. Everyone in Silvercrest would be watching. Alara stood in the hallway outside the grand chamber, uncertain for the first time since arriving. Maybe I should leave, she said quietly. Alexander turned toward her. Why? Because this started because of me. He shook his head. No, this started because some people are afraid of change. Alara looked at him. You are the Alpha King. You could simply order them to accept me. Alexander's expression softened. That would prove nothing. A pause. A true leader does not force loyalty. They earn it. For the first time, Alara saw the difference between the crown and the man wearing it. But neither of them knew that tomorrow's gathering would reveal a betrayal much closer to the throne than either expected. The Grand Hall of Silvercrest had never felt so large. Every seat was filled. Every corner of the chamber carried the quiet tension of a pack waiting for something important to happen. The silver banners hanging from the walls barely moved, but everyone inside could feel the storm building. At the center of the room stood Alexander Voss, the Alpha King. Beside him stood Alara Whitmore, the Omega healer who had changed the balance of the entire pack without ever asking for power. Nova sat at her feet, watching everyone with the serious expression of a wolf pup who believed he was responsible for judging the entire room. Rowan Mercer leaned slightly toward Alexander. I have to admit, he does look like he thinks he owns the place. Alexander glanced down at Nova. He does. Rowan nodded. At least he is honest. A few members of the pack almost smiled, but the moment ended when Cassian Vale stepped forward. Today is not about a healer or a wolf pup, Cassian announced. It is about the future of Silvercrest. His voice carried across the hall. An Alpha King must make decisions based on duty, not personal feelings. Alara felt every eye turn toward her. She had expected this. She knew the moment she entered the castle that some people would never see her as anything more than an Omega from the border villages. But hearing it said aloud still hurt. Alexander noticed. He always noticed. Choose your words carefully, Cassian. The council elder remained calm. I speak for those who fear the old ways are being forgotten. He lifted a document. The royal wolf has formed an unusual attachment. The Alpha King has allowed an unknown Omega access to royal matters. And now old family records have appeared that suggest hidden connections to the throne. Murmurs spread through the hall. Alara's heart sank. They were not questioning her actions anymore. They were questioning her existence. Then Nova stood. The entire room became quiet. The pup walked away from Alara and crossed the floor. Everyone watched as he stopped directly in front of Alexander. For a moment, nobody understood. Then Nova turned around and walked back to Alara. The message was simple. He trusted both of them. Not one instead of the other. Both. Alexander looked at the pack. You see a problem because you believe loyalty only comes from blood and position. His voice was steady. But this pup was protected by someone who had no title, no army, and no reason to help him except compassion. Cassian's expression tightened. Compassion does not lead a kingdom. Alara finally spoke. Her voice was calm. No, but a kingdom without compassion is not worth leading. The hall went silent. She continued. You keep asking what I want from Silvercrest. The answer is nothing. I did not come here for a title. I did not come here for a crown. I came because Nova needed help. Her words reached everyone because they were simple, honest, impossible to argue with. But then a messenger rushed into the chamber carrying another sealed report. Alexander opened it. His expression changed. Your Majesty? Rowan asked. Alexander looked toward the council. The documents used today were altered. The room erupted with whispers. Someone had changed the records before the gathering. Someone wanted the pack to doubt Alara and question his leadership. Cassian immediately looked surprised. Almost too surprised. Alexander noticed. So did Alara. The betrayal was no longer hidden in old archives. It was standing in the same room with them. Alexander closed the report. This gathering is not finished. His eyes moved across the council. Because now we find out who tried to control the truth. For the first time, the pack saw something different in their Alpha King. Not anger. Not fear. Determination. And beside him, Alara realized something important. Alexander was no longer protecting her because of Nova. He was protecting her because he believed in her. But the person who changed the records was still inside Silvercrest. And they were not finished trying to break the bond that was bringing the pack together. The truth did not stay hidden for long inside Silvercrest Castle. By sunrise, every corner of the pack territory knew the same thing. The records presented at the gathering had been changed. Someone had tried to turn the pack against Alara Whitmore and question the Alpha King's judgment. But knowing there was a betrayal was much easier than finding the person responsible. Alexander Voss spent the entire morning inside the council chamber reviewing every document, every seal, and every signature. Rowan Mercer stood beside him, looking more tired than usual. I have one question, Rowan said. Alexander looked up. What? How many times can someone say they are protecting tradition before they admit they are protecting their own power? Alexander was silent. Because he already knew the answer. Too many times. Across the castle, Alara sat with Nova in the royal gardens. The little wolf pup was unusually quiet. You know, she said, gently touching his fur. For someone who caused an entire political crisis, you seem very comfortable. Nova opened one eye and looked at her. Alara smiled slightly. Yes, I know. Everyone else is worried, and you are taking a nap. A soft sound came from behind her. Alexander stood there. He has always had unusual priorities. Alara looked at him. You look like you have not slept. I have been investigating. That is the polite way of saying you were staring at documents until your eyes hurt. Alexander almost smiled. You are very direct. Animals do not respond well to pretending. She looked at him. People usually do not either. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The bond between them was becoming harder to ignore. Not because of some magical force demanding an answer, but because every conversation revealed another piece of who they were beneath their titles. Alexander was not just an Alpha King. He was someone who carried every mistake of the past like a responsibility he could never put down. Alara was not just an Omega healer. She was someone who had spent her entire life helping others while never expecting anyone to protect her. Then Rowan arrived with new information. We found the source of the altered documents. Alexander turned immediately. Who? Rowan hesitated. A records assistant from the council archive. Alara frowned. A person that low in the hierarchy could not change official records alone. Alexander nodded. Exactly. The real question was who gave the order. They returned to the archive room where the altered documents had been stored. This time, Alara noticed something everyone else missed. A small mark on the edge of the paper. This was not added recently, she said. Alexander looked closer. How can you tell? Because the ink reacted differently from the original. Someone did not create a new record. They replaced an old one. The discovery changed everything. This was not a sudden attack. It was a plan that had been prepared for years. Someone had been waiting for the right moment to use Alara's family history against her. Before they could continue, Nova suddenly moved toward a hidden shelf. He pushed against an old wooden panel, revealing a small compartment behind it. Inside was a sealed letter carrying the royal mark. Alexander opened it carefully. The message was from a former Alpha King. The words inside were brief, but their meaning was clear. The future of Silvercrest will depend on whether the next Alpha chooses control or trust. Alexander read the sentence twice. Alara watched his expression change. Your ancestors knew this would happen. He nodded slowly. They knew someone would try to control the pack through fear. Outside the archive, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed. Cassian Vale entered the hallway. His expression remained calm, but his eyes immediately went to the letter in Alexander's hand. And that small reaction told them everything. Alexander folded the letter. You knew about this. Cassian did not answer. For the first time, the oldest member of the council looked uncertain. Alara stepped closer to Alexander. Not behind him, beside him. And the entire pack would soon see that the greatest challenge facing Silvercrest was not an enemy outside their walls. It was the truth waiting inside them. The hallway outside the archive had never felt so quiet. Cassian Vale stood beneath the silver banners of Silvercrest, facing the Alpha King he had advised for years. For the first time, the confidence in his voice was gone. Alexander Voss held the old letter in his hand, but he did not need more proof. The look in Cassian's eyes had already answered the question. You knew, Alexander said. Cassian lowered his gaze for a moment. I knew the old records existed. Alara Whitmore stood beside Alexander, listening carefully. And you hid them. Cassian looked at her. I protected this pack. The words sounded familiar. Too familiar. Everyone in Silvercrest had heard them before. Protect the tradition. Protect the bloodline. Protect the old ways. But Alara understood something now. Sometimes people use the word protection when they really meant control. Alexander stepped closer. You changed records. You erased families from history. You decided who deserved to be heard. Cassian's expression hardened. Because someone had to make difficult choices. A pack cannot survive on feelings. Alara looked at the council elder. No, but it cannot survive without trust either. Her voice was calm, but the entire hallway seemed to listen. You believed strength came from controlling everyone around you. But a true leader does not need to make everyone smaller just to stand taller. Those words reached deeper than anger ever could. Because they were not an attack. They were the truth. The final gathering of Silvercrest was held that evening. Every member of the pack came to the Grand Hall. Warriors stood beside healers. Elders stood beside workers. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Alexander stood before them, not as someone defending his crown, but as someone accepting responsibility. For years, I believed being a strong alpha meant carrying every burden alone, he said. I believed control created safety. He looked toward Alara and Nova. I was wrong. The hall became silent. A pack is not strong because one person has all the power. A pack is strong because everyone has a place within it. Then Alexander turned toward Alara. Alara Whitmore was judged before she was known. She was questioned before she was understood. Yet when Silvercrest needed someone, she stood between danger and our future without asking for recognition. Alara looked down, uncomfortable with so much attention. Nova immediately moved closer to her, as if reminding everyone that he had already made his choice long ago. A few members of the pack smiled. Even Rowan quietly said, "The pup has excellent timing." Alara almost laughed. The decision regarding Cashin was not filled with revenge. Alexander removed him from his council position and ordered a full restoration of the records his actions had hidden. Justice was given, but not through cruelty, through truth. Weeks later, Silvercrest began to change. Omega healers were invited into leadership discussions. The old rules were examined. The pack learned that tradition was not something to protect from change. It was something that had to grow with the people it served. One evening, Alara stood in the garden watching Nova chase leaves across the grass. Alexander joined her. "You know," she said, "when I first arrived here, I thought everyone would always see me as an outsider." Alexander looked at the castle behind them. "And now?" Alara smiled softly. "Now I think some people just needed time to learn." Alexander nodded. He understood. A crown could command attention. A title could demand respect. But neither could create loyalty. That had to be earned. The bond between them was not powerful because fate had chosen it. It was powerful because they chose trust every day. And Silvercrest never forgot the night an unknown Omega protected a royal pup. Not because she became important afterward, but because she proved she was important before anyone was willing to see it. And that was the lesson the pack carried for generations. True leadership is not measured by how many people follow your command. It is measured by how many people feel safe standing beside you.